everybody. Luke Gromen, FFTT. Hope everybody's well. Had a great weekend. Things here were probably the nicest weekend of the year in Cleveland, so those are always nice. Got a little sun on my dome, which is also always nice. So I'm going to jump right in here. Had a couple of number of really good questions. I want to thank everybody for dropping thoughts on the thread, and so let's jump right in. So the first question is from OC. Could you address this concept further? Treasury issuance will outstrip Fed QE, shrinking the base of money. Druckenmiller, his presentation. And so to me, I think this is the most important macro question, certainly for the next 3 months, maybe for the next month. You get it right, you're likely going to have a good year. You get it wrong, you're likely going to have a bad year. I tweeted this weekend that I thought the second most important thing that Druckenmiller said talked about that he basically flat out laid out that the United States has a fiscal problem that's very acute right now. The thing that was most interesting to me, I tweeted, was how few people realized what he said. And so what I mean is, if you listen to what he said, if you can get a hold of the transcript and reread it, what he said is in the next month, the amount of Fed balance sheet growth is going to be overtaken by the amount of Treasury issuance. That's a fiscal problem. And ultimately, those auctions are going to get done. They're going to suck up dollar liquidity everywhere else around the world. And so the sort of the crux of Druckenmiller's bearish point, the reason why he's so bearish, he focused very much on the fundamentals and the earnings, but when he talked about the catalyst, he talked about the U.S. having a fiscal crisis soon, in the next month or two. And so, to me, that's really what this concept is about. Now, this is also, sort of Brent Johnson's milkshake, which is the government sucking up everybody's milkshake. Problem is, we saw this. It doesn't lead to stocks rising. We saw this in March. When we saw it in March, dollar went to 102, 103. And the S&P went down 35%. So this is a very strong dollar, very bad for pretty much everything else scenario that Druckenmiller's talking about, unless, and this is, again, very interesting how few people put any weight on this, even though Druckenmiller said it, unless the Fed does a 180 and starts growing their balance sheet again, which they're going to have to. It's just a question of when. All right, next question from RJ. Hi, Luke. I'm sure Fed would also know that they cannot allow the dollar to strengthen. I agree. Then aren't they playing with fire by tapering their purchases, or are they taking into consideration the $400 billion plus spent by the U.S. Treasury out of the balance, the Treasury General account by June end? Very good question. So by way of background, Fed has gone from $75 billion in treasuries a day. They're down to $6 billion a day, only $6 billion a day this week. The $6 billion a day would still be far bigger than they ever did at the peak last cycle. But they've tapered meaningfully. And so all else equal, that is dollar bullish, risk bearish. Then we look then as well, the $400 billion plus. The Fed has pulled the Treasury General account, which is basically the Treasury's bank account at the Fed. They've got $1.2 trillion nearly sitting in the Treasury General account that they can spend whenever, however they see fit. Historically, the correlation between the dollar and the Treasury General account is pretty good. Treasury General account goes up, sucking dollars out of the system. Dollar goes up, and vice versa. The 1.2 trillion is the biggest TGA number we've ever seen, records going back 12, 15 years. When we saw it go from 400 billion to 50 billion in 2017, the dollar fell 12%. At some point, this TGA is going to stop going up and start going down, and all else equal, that's going to be dollar bearish, risk bullish. We just don't know when yet. So it's a very important question. And then the last question there, too, is I think you need to watch in terms of the taper what's going on with the regulatory environment. And by that I mean if you go back to mid-April, the Fed quietly changed the supplementary liquidity ratios, or SLRs, for the U.S. banking system, such that U.S. Treasuries are temporarily don't count against the SLR. And temporary is for 12 months. They can just keep rolling at 12 months, as I'm sure they might if they need to. But the point is that in theory, banks can buy almost unlimited treasuries with no hit to their capital base. There's no capital charge for owning treasuries. And so if the U.S. banking system starts buying unlimited treasuries while the Fed tapers from $75 billion a day to $6 billion a day, it's kind of 6 of one, half dozen of the other. So that's why I say you need to watch sort of all of the hands behind the curtain to see what's happening, to see if there's actually a dollar liquidity drain or there's not. And the thing ultimately, sort of the Texas hedge or the quick check that I use, I just watch the DXY. If the DXY is rising, liquidity is getting pulled out. If it's not, if it's fallen, there's excess liquidity. So the fact that we've sort of been in this 99 to 100.5 trading range for the dollar suggests they're doing a pretty good job of managing dollar liquidity relative to needs, all else equal. Okay, next question, JS. In what world does gold fall sharply before rising to new all-time highs? Great question. I think in the Stan Druckenmiller scenario, where if the Fed does not buy enough treasuries, or if the U.S. banking system does not buy enough treasuries, and we see this treasury issuance relative to Fed and banking system treasury buying go upside down in the next month to 2 months to 3 months, as Druckenmiller's talking about, you're going to be talking about this liquidity suck out of the system. And we saw what happened in March. Ultimately, if the Fed doesn't do enough, everything falls. You get dollar up, you get equities down, emerging markets down, gold down, treasuries down, and then it just comes down to a question of when's the Fed say enough. And so that is, I think, the gold bear case at this point. And it's basically, the Fed is left, just leaves everybody to twist in the wind in a scenario that's good for nothing but the dollar. Let's see, MH. The Fed and ECB have stuck to their lend not spend lines, so why have fiscal authorities been so slow to hand out free cash to their constituents? The political capital to oppose government largesse simply does not exist today, so why is fiscal suddenly so indecisive? It's a great question, and I think it's largely both a lag and lag to the political realities. This stuff just takes time to get through as people decide what they want to do, as they decide how much pork and where they want to put the pork into the spending in some cases. But to your point, there really is, at this point, bipartisan support for sort of all-out wartime finance spending. And I think I want to trademark here the phrase wartime finance. I'm going to borrow it actually from the Treasury Borrowing Advisory Committee, who said it 2 weeks ago in one of their presentations. I think wartime finance is going to be the story of the next 5 years. And it's something we haven't seen since 1942 to 51. It really continued through the Cold War, much of the Cold War through 1979. But the punchline is that there's no political will to stop spending, and there's a whole lot of interest in spending. And so I think, to answer your question directly, I think it's just a lag. I think we'll start to see more fiscal spending, particularly if the reopenings don't go that well. We've seen talk of $3 trillion of another round already, and that's gotten sort of batted around back and forth. So let's watch and see, but I really think it's more just a political lag than anything else. Let's see, from BY, impact of a potential second wave of a mutated COVID-19. I think it's bad. I think it'd be really bad. You shut everything down. And then I think ultimately you start talking about a Fed balance sheet in the 15 trillion range, 20 trillion range in the next 12 months, 18 months. It all falls back to the Fed. And it's intellectually offensive to say that, but it is what it is. I didn't make the rules. I try not to moralize about it. All right, last question here from BN. What does a failed Treasury auction and Federal Reserve front lawn dump of money look like to you? So front lawn dump is a reference to another and FOA, friend of another, who've both been made famous by FOFOA, a great blog that I read as well as a number of others do. Focuses a lot on gold, monetary policy. At any rate, there's a famous quote saying that there would be no deflation allowed under policy that would allow for the printing of money and dumping dollars on the front lawn, to people's front lawns to avoid deflation. So, in my opinion, you're not going to get a Treasury auction fail. I don't think that is going to happen. There's ways to make that. To prevent that from happening. You've seen a number of times in the last 18 months auctions get sloppy, but I just don't think you're going to get a Treasury auction fail. For me, a front lawn dump, I think we're starting to move in a process in that direction where it is a little bit, again, of this boiling the frog type of dynamic. I think there'll start to be I think at some point there's going to be a reaction of, oh my gosh, the balance sheet's 10 trillion. It's going to be 15 trillion soon. It's going to be 20 trillion soon. They're going to have to go to 40 trillion eventually. Oh my gosh, unless it gets better, they're going to have to go to 50 trillion. And I think at some point in that process, there starts to be this recognition of basically Gresham's law, where the bad money chases out the good. You'll see good money go into gold, go into hard assets, go into equities relative to stocks, which is what we saw the last time we had wartime finance from 42 to 51. Stocks did great relative to bonds. Bonds were fine nominally, but bonds did poorly relative to inflation. Bonds did very poorly relative to stocks, and gold was pegged at 35 bucks an ounce and illegal to own, so you couldn't really flock into it anyway in America, at least. So at any rate, that is going to do it for tonight. I want to thank everybody for jumping on. As always, if you enjoy these updates, check out FFTT Tree Rings. There's a lot. We get a lot of great feedback about that, and it is a much more detailed weekly Friday update of these types with a lot more background charts and color. So check it out if you're interested. Otherwise, everyone have a great week. Look forward to chatting with you soon. Everyone stay safe. Take care, everybody.